Most people think communication is about saying the right thing. It is not. It is about becoming the kind of person whose words do not leak weakness before the sentence even finishes. Because people do not just hear what you say. They hear your hesitation. They hear your need for approval. They hear your fear of conflict. They hear your lack of clarity. They hear your inner disorder. That is why two people can say almost the same sentence, and one sounds forgettable while the other sounds powerful. The difference is not vocabulary. The difference is self-command. Communication is a mirror. It reveals your mind, your emotional discipline, your relationship with silence, your ability to think before reacting, your ability to remain steady while being seen. Marcus Aurelius said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That sounds simple, but it is not simple at all. Because most people are not speaking from truth and steadiness. They are speaking from noise, from pressure, from image management, from insecurity, from the need to be liked, understood, admired, or not rejected. So this video is not just about speaking better. It is about becoming harder to ignore because you have become harder to shake. It is about learning how to think clearly, listen deeply, speak with force, stay calm under pressure, and carry yourself in a way that makes your words land with weight. By the end of this video, I want you to understand something most people never fully learn. Powerful communication is not performance. It is inner order made audible. Chapter 1. Why most people communicate badly even when they mean well. Most people do not communicate badly because they are unintelligent. They communicate badly because when they speak, too many battles are happening inside them at once. They are trying to express an idea, but at the same time, they are also trying not to sound foolish, trying not to be judged, trying not to be rejected, trying to be liked, trying to be respected, trying to protect themselves from misunderstanding before misunderstanding has even happened. So instead of speaking from clarity, they speak through interference. And interference always leaks. This is the first truth you must accept if you want to become a better communicator. People do not only respond to your words, they respond to the condition from which your words emerge. If your words come out of anxiety, people feel the anxiety. If your words come out of defensiveness, people feel the defense before they process the message. If your words come out of neediness, people feel that too. And if your words come out of calm, structure, and self-respect, that becomes visible almost immediately. This is why communication is never just verbal. It is psychological. Every sentence carries more than information. It carries state. Epictetus taught that some things are in our control and some are not. The problem is that most people try to control what cannot be fully controlled in conversation. They try to control how people see them, how quickly people agree, how warmly people respond, whether they admire their intelligence, whether they interpret every sentence exactly as intended. And because those things cannot be perfectly controlled, their speech becomes strained. They over-explain. They rush. They soften everything too much. Or they become sharp too early because their nervous system mistakes tension for danger. That is not a language problem. That is a self-regulation problem. A person with inner steadiness communicates differently, not because they memorized some trick, but because they are not fighting themselves while trying to be heard. Think about the strongest communicator you know. Very often, What makes them powerful is not that they speak the most. It is that they seem undivided. Their mind is not scattered across 5 fears while they are talking. They are not begging for approval through extra explanation. They are not leaking panic into every pause. They are there. And presence is persuasive, not in a manipulative way, in a trustworthy way. Seneca believed style reflects character, and that is deeper than it first appears. Your way of speaking does not merely present your mind, it often exposes it. So if your words feel weak, blurry, apologetic, scattered, or forgettable, the question is not only, what should I say better? The deeper question is, what is happening inside me while I say it? Do I rush because I am afraid of silence? Do I over-explain because I do not trust my own worth? Do I become vague because I have not thought clearly? Do I speak aggressively because I confuse force with authority? Do I disappear because I learned that speaking honestly feels dangerous? These are the real questions. Because communication failures usually have roots. A person may think they have a speaking problem, when in fact they have a fear problem, or an approval problem, or a clarity problem, or an emotional regulation problem. The root decides the pattern. A person who needs approval will often sound eager. A person who fears conflict will often sound indirect. A person who fears being exposed will often hide behind complexity. A person who lacks inner order will often ramble, react, interrupt, or collapse into self-protection. This is why powerful communication begins before speech. It begins with becoming more inwardly ordered. That means you stop trying to sound powerful and start becoming calmer, clearer, more honest, more exact, more willing to let a sentence stand without rescuing it, more willing to let silence exist without panicking, more willing to say what is true without decorating it to death. And if this is already touching something you know you need to work on, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who would genuinely benefit from this. And in the comments, write this: my words will carry weight. Because that is not just a phrase. It is a decision to stop speaking from inner disorder. Now here is the deeper wound beneath bad communication. Many people do not trust that simple truth is enough. So they add, and add, and add. More explanation, more urgency, more self-defense, more words. But more words do not create more power. Often they only reveal more anxiety. The person who trusts themselves does not need to constantly chase the sentence after it lands. They can say what is true and let it breathe. That is strength. And maybe this is the most important lesson of this chapter. Most people do not have a word problem. They have an internal noise problem. Their message is weak because their attention is divided. Their sentences are blurry because they are over-managing how they are being received. Their communication feels unstable because too much of it is coming from fear instead of from grounded thought. But that can change, because once the inside becomes calmer, the outside becomes cleaner. When your mind is clearer, your words become clearer. When your emotions are steadier, your tone becomes steadier. When your need for approval weakens, your presence strengthens. That is where real communication begins. Not in tricks, in self-mastery. Chapter 2. Why clear thinking matters more than clever speaking. Most people think communication begins when you open your mouth. It does not. It begins in the quality of your thought. Long before a sentence reaches another person, it has already been shaped by the structure or disorder inside your mind. If your thinking is rushed, your words will be rushed. If your thinking is vague, your words will be vague. If your thinking is crowded, your speech will carry that crowding. And if your thinking is clear, even simple language can sound strong. That is why some people speak for 5 minutes and say almost nothing. Not because they have no vocabulary, because they have no center. They are circling the point instead of standing in it. They are performing thought instead of presenting it. They are adding language where they should be adding clarity. This is one of the biggest communication mistakes in the modern world. People try to sound smart before they try to think clearly. They reach for larger words, more polished phrases, longer explanations, a stronger tone, a more impressive structure. But clever speech cannot save confused thought. In fact, the more confused a person is, the more likely they are to hide behind verbal decoration. Because confusion often wants camouflage. The Stoics respected simplicity, precision, and truth, because those qualities usually come from a disciplined mind. Epictetus said, "Speak only what is necessary, and in few words." And Pascal understood that shorter, cleaner expression takes more effort, not less. That is why clear thinking matters more than clever speaking. Because a clear thinker does not need to lean so heavily on style. Their thought already has shape. Their message already has spine. Their words do not have to drag the meaning into existence. The meaning is already there. When the mind is overloaded, emotionally activated, or split between too many goals, speech loses precision. That is why people ramble, or freeze, or answer the wrong question, or speak around the point instead of through it. Many people say, "I know what I mean, I just cannot say it." Sometimes that is true, but often they do not fully know what they mean. They know the feeling, they know the reaction, they know the cloud, but they have not yet done the work of turning the cloud into a clear idea. Strong communication asks that work of you. What am I actually trying to say? What is the real point here? What matters most? What can be removed? What belongs in this sentence and what does not? That is not just communication skill. That is mental discipline. A scattered mind produces scattered language. A divided mind produces diluted speech. And a mind that has never learned to choose the essential point will often bury that point beneath extra material. This is why clear thinkers often sound more powerful even when they use fewer words. Their mind is not leaking in every direction. Their thought has been compressed. The sentence has pressure behind it. Nietzsche once said he wanted to say in 10 sentences what others say in a whole book. That is not just style. That is force, not empty brevity, dense clarity. A sentence that knows what it is doing. So, how do you begin? First, stop speaking from the first draft of your mind. Many people do that constantly. They think something and immediately say it. They feel something and immediately express it. They react to the moment and call that honesty. But first draft speech is often messy speech. Thought matures. And mature thought sounds different from immediate thought. It sounds cleaner, calmer, more exact, less needy. Second, practice reducing your point to one sentence before you speak at length. If you had only one sentence to explain your point, what would it be? That question forces the mind to prioritize. It cuts through self-indulgent explanation. It exposes vagueness. It makes you choose what actually matters. And once you have that sentence, the rest of your speaking becomes stronger. Third, separate feeling from meaning. Many people confuse "I feel strongly about this" with "I understand this clearly." Those are not the same. You can care deeply and still communicate badly. You can feel intensely and still think poorly. So before you speak, ask, what is the actual idea here beneath my feeling? That question can save you from emotional flooding. Fourth, learn to tolerate the discomfort of quiet thinking. The modern mind hates slowness. It wants instant output, instant commentary, instant language. But clear thought is not usually born at the speed of anxiety. It needs room. The person who learns to think before speaking immediately separates themselves. Not because they are weaker, because they are deliberate. And deliberate is powerful. Fifth, understand that clarity is mercy. A confused speaker makes the listener do too much work. A clear speaker gives relief. Relief from verbal clutter. Relief from mental fog. Relief from emotional noise. That is one reason clear communicators often seem more authoritative. Not because they dominate, because they reduce noise. A great communicator is often just a person who has learned not to betray the truth with unnecessary noise. They do not distort it to sound smart. They do not hide it behind over-explaining. They do not weaken it by piling too many words on top of it. They let the thought stand in its strongest form. That takes courage, because many people use extra words as a shield, to hide, to soften exposure, to control how they are perceived. But cleaner thought requires greater honesty. Do I really understand this? Or am I hoping that if I keep talking, understanding will appear? That question can change your whole communication style. Once you begin honoring clarity over cleverness, your relationship to speech changes. You stop trying to impress. You start trying to reveal. You stop trying to sound intelligent. You start trying to become intelligible. And that is far more powerful. Chapter 3. Why emotional control is the real foundation of powerful speech. A person can have a good mind and still sound weak. A person can have insight, intelligence, even truth on their side, and still fail to move anyone. Why? Because communication is not only shaped by thought, it is shaped by the emotional condition of the person speaking. And this is where many people lose their power. Not in what they know, but in what happens to them internally the moment tension enters the room. A hard question, a skeptical face, a disagreement, a challenge, a silence that feels too long, a moment where they feel seen and judged at the same time. And suddenly, everything changes. Their breathing shortens. Their thoughts speed up. Their tone tightens. Their words lose rhythm. Their point starts collapsing under the weight of their own nervous system. That is not rare. That is normal for untrained people. Because speech is never separate from state. If your inner state is disturbed, your communication will carry that disturbance. Seneca said the greatest remedy for anger is delay. That is not just advice for temper. It is advice for communication. Delay gives reason time to return before speech does damage. When people are emotionally activated, they do not simply express themselves. They leak themselves. They say too much. They defend too quickly. They interrupt too early. They over-explain. They sharpen their tone without meaning to. Or they disappear completely and call it composure when really it is fear. Without emotional control, your best ideas often come out in weakened form. A simple question sounds like an attack. A neutral silence feels like rejection. A disagreement feels like humiliation. And a moment of uncertainty makes someone flood the conversation with unnecessary words. This is why so many people think they need better sentences when what they really need is better regulation. A regulated person sounds different. Not always louder, not always more polished, but steadier. They can hear something uncomfortable without collapsing. They can tolerate a pause without panicking. They can stay with a thought even when the room becomes tense. They can disagree without becoming emotionally chaotic. That kind of steadiness gives words unusual weight, because people trust a voice that is not fighting itself. So how do you build emotional control in speech? First, stop obeying the first wave. The first wave is rarely your wisest one. It is the urge to correct immediately, defend immediately, prove immediately, explain immediately, fill the silence immediately. But that first wave is often ego mixed with fear. The stronger communicator learns to pause, not for performance, for accuracy. A short pause can save a whole conversation because it gives your intelligence time to catch up with your reaction. Second, learn to separate discomfort from danger. A disagreement feels dangerous. A silence feels dangerous. Not knowing exactly what to say feels dangerous. Someone looking unconvinced feels dangerous. But discomfort is not danger. And if you do not learn that distinction, your speech will remain overly reactive. The mature speaker can feel pressure without becoming ruled by pressure. Third, stop making every conversation a test of your worth. Many people are not only trying to communicate, they are also trying to survive judgment. So every conversation becomes heavier than it needs to be. If people agree, they feel relief. If people look doubtful, they feel threatened. If people misunderstand, they feel diminished. That is too much pressure to put on speech. A stronger communicator enters differently. They still care. They still want to be understood. But they are not asking every conversation to decide whether they are enough. That changes their tone. Fourth, train your body, not just your words. Your body is part of communication. If your breath is rushed, your words will often rush. If your jaw is tight, your tone will tighten. If your body is braced for conflict, your sentences will reflect that bracing. So before important conversations, return to the body. Slow the breath. Release the shoulders. Unclench the jaw. Sit or stand with more stillness. A calmer body gives clearer access to your mind. Fifth, practice not reacting to your own reaction. Many people get anxious and then become anxious about being anxious. They get flustered and then ashamed of being flustered. They lose one sentence and mentally spiral. That second reaction often does more damage than the first. So learn to say, I feel activated right now. That is fine. I do not need to become that activation. That one move creates space. And space is where self-command lives. Sixth, become better at listening under pressure. A dysregulated person often answers what they feared was meant, not what was actually said. A regulated person can stay with the real sentence. That makes them far more effective. Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose. Communication lives in that space. If you lose that space, reaction takes over. If you protect that space, your words gain force. People with weak emotional control often believe they have a communication problem. But many times they have a self-governance problem that becomes audible. Once they become steadier, their communication changes almost automatically. Their pacing improves. Their listening improves. Their tone improves. Their ability to stay on point improves. Their words stop carrying so much fear. That is why communication growth is never only technical. It is psychological, moral, philosophical. It asks, can you stay present under pressure? Can you remain honest without becoming chaotic? Can you keep your dignity when the room becomes difficult? Can you let discomfort exist without surrendering your clarity? That is what powerful speakers can do, not because they never feel anything, but because feeling something is no longer enough to control what they say. Chapter 4. Why listening, not speaking, is often what makes a person truly powerful in communication. Most people think communication power belongs to the person who speaks the best. That is only half true, because in real life, many people speak well enough. What they do not do well is listen, and that is exactly why their communication never becomes truly powerful. They wait for their turn. They prepare answers while the other person is still talking. They listen through ego. They listen through fear. They listen through defensiveness. They listen only long enough to protect themselves, correct the other person, or regain control of the room. That is not listening. That is tension pretending to be attention. And people feel the difference immediately. One of the fastest ways to lose trust is to make people feel that you were never really with them. You heard their words, but not their meaning. You caught their sentence, but not their state. You reacted to their tone, but missed their pain. You defended yourself before understanding what was truly being said. This is why listening is such a powerful skill. It makes people feel seen, and people trust those who make them feel seen. The Stoics respected restraint because they respected self-command. And deep listening is impossible without restraint. You cannot listen deeply if you are constantly interrupting internally. You cannot listen deeply if your ego is rushing to prove something. You cannot listen deeply if every sentence from the other person becomes a threat, a challenge, or a test of your worth. Bad listeners do not fail because their ears are weak. They fail because their inner noise is too loud. They are too busy reacting, too busy preparing, too busy defending, too busy filtering everything through themselves. True listening is not passive. It is disciplined. It is one of the most demanding forms of self-control. Because to listen well, you must momentarily step out of the center. You must let the other person's meaning arrive before your reaction takes over. This is especially difficult in emotionally charged moments, especially when you disagree, especially when you feel misunderstood, especially when something in you wants to interrupt and fix the conversation immediately. But that is exactly where powerful communicators separate themselves. They do not only know how to speak, they know how to stay still long enough for truth to appear. And truth often appears slowly. Sometimes a person does not mean what they first say. Sometimes they are speaking from pain and need a little space before they become clear. Sometimes the real message is underneath the first layer. If you only listen to the surface, you miss all of that. But if you know how to stay present, something changes. You begin hearing more than words. You hear fear. You hear confusion. You hear longing. You hear insecurity. You hear what the person is struggling to say, not only what they managed to say cleanly. That level of listening gives you enormous power. Not manipulative power, human power. the power to understand before reacting, the power to respond to the real issue instead of the visible smoke around it, the power to calm a conversation simply because you were patient enough to hear it properly. Many people are not starving for advice. They are starving to feel understood. And when people feel deeply understood, they soften. They open. They become more honest. They become more willing to hear you too. That is why listening is not separate from influence. It is one of its foundations. A poor listener interrupts too quickly because silence makes them nervous, assumes too quickly because they think they already know, personalizes too quickly because their ego cannot separate hearing from being attacked, or listens only for weak points so they can win. All of these habits damage communication, not only because they make the other person feel unseen, but because they make your own responses weaker. You cannot answer well if you did not understand well. You cannot speak to the real issue if you only reacted to the first trigger. In conflict, listening becomes even more valuable, because when emotions rise, most people stop listening and start preparing emotional weapons. But the strongest communicator in the room is often the one who can still listen even while tension rises. That person gains something priceless: accuracy. And accuracy is power. Because once you understand the real issue, you stop wasting energy on the wrong fight. You stop answering tone when the real issue is hurt. You stop fighting words when the real issue is fear. You stop reacting to surface frustration when the deeper issue is feeling ignored. That is the advantage of listening well. It helps you find the real conversation underneath the visible one. So how do you become a better listener? First, stop treating silence like a threat. Let people finish. Let pauses work. Let the next sentence come. Sometimes the real sentence comes after the pause. Second, listen for meaning, not only wording. What is this person really trying to say? What are they actually needing here? What is the pain beneath the phrasing? Third, do not rush to remove discomfort. When someone says something hard to hear, let it land. Do not defend immediately. Do not solve immediately. Stay with it. Fourth, reflect before replying. So what you are saying is, it sounds like, if I understand you correctly, this is not a trick. It is a discipline of accuracy. Fifth, notice your inner interruption. Even when you stay outwardly silent, you may still be judging, defending, planning, and rejecting internally. Catch that. Then return. Return to the sentence. Return to the person. Return to the moment. Listening is not about being quiet while the other person talks. It is about keeping your ego from hijacking the conversation before understanding has a chance to form. In a world where everyone wants to be heard, the person who can truly hear becomes unforgettable. Chapter 5. How to speak with strength in difficult conversations. Anyone can sound calm when the conversation is easy. Anyone can sound thoughtful when nothing important is at stake. But communication is not truly tested there. It is tested in difficult conversations. When you need to say no, when you need to set a boundary, when you need to confront disrespect, when you need to tell the truth without losing yourself, when someone is disappointed, angry, manipulative, or emotionally charged, when silence would be easier, but silence would also be self-betrayal. That is where communication becomes character. Because in difficult conversations, your words are no longer just carrying information. They are carrying courage. And this is exactly where many people collapse. Not because they do not know what to say, but because the emotional price of saying it feels too high. They fear conflict. They fear rejection. They fear being seen as harsh. They fear hurting someone. They fear losing connection. They fear losing approval. So they avoid, or they explode, or they water the truth down until it no longer has enough force to do its job. All three create damage. Avoidance creates resentment. Explosion creates destruction. Watered down truth creates confusion. That is why difficult conversations require a different kind of strength. Not the strength of force, the strength of steadiness. The Stoics understood that courage was acting according to reason even when fear was present. That is exactly what difficult communication asks of you. Can you remain governed by principle when emotion would prefer comfort, avoidance, or aggression? That is the real test. Because the strongest communicator in a hard conversation is not the one who dominates the room. It is the one who can remain clear without becoming cruel, firm without becoming reactive, honest without becoming chaotic. Before the conversation, ask, what is the truth here? What boundary needs to be named? What is the one point I must not abandon? What am I responsible for saying? What am I not responsible for controlling? That last question matters deeply, because one of the biggest reasons people lose themselves in hard conversations is that they try to control the other person's reaction. They want the truth to land gently. They want agreement immediately. They want no misunderstanding. They want no discomfort. But that is not always possible. And when you make your honesty dependent on the other person reacting well, your honesty becomes fragile. A stronger communicator understands, I am responsible for the clarity and character of what I say. I am not fully responsible for how another person receives it. That distinction protects dignity. Strength in difficult conversations usually sounds simpler than people expect. This does not work for me. I need to be honest about something. I am not comfortable with that. That crossed a line for me. I am willing to discuss this, but not like this. I understand your view, but my decision is still the same. These are not flashy sentences, but they are anchored. And anchored language is powerful because it does not beg. It states. A boundary does not need 10 paragraphs of justification. Often, the clearer and more self-respecting your boundary is, the less decoration it needs. Do not use a hard conversation to discharge old emotion. That is where many people confuse honesty with dumping. They save frustration too long. Then, when the moment comes, they do not communicate. They unload. And unloading is rarely precise. A stronger communicator does not wait until they are emotionally flooded to say what matters. They try to speak before pressure becomes poison. And when they do speak, they stay close to the actual issue. This happened. This is the effect. This is what I need. This is what will change going forward. That structure creates power, not because it is cold, because it is clean. Many people are weak in disagreement because they secretly believe disagreement means relational danger. So when someone sees things differently, they either become combative or collapse into appeasement. But a mature communicator can stay connected to themselves while disagreement exists. That is essential, because if you cannot tolerate disagreement, your communication will always be controlled by the fear of friction. True strength says, we may not agree. The room may be uncomfortable. This may not resolve immediately, and I can still stay steady. Do not confuse calm with softness. A lot of people think if they stay calm, they will lose power. So they sharpen their tone to feel strong. But sharpness is not the same as strength. Very often, sharpness is just fear using aggression to avoid vulnerability. Real strength sounds calmer than insecurity expects. It does not need to rush. It does not need to prove. It does not need to wound in order to stand. Some of the strongest sentences in difficult conversations are quiet ones. No, that will not continue. I do not agree. I am stepping back from this. We need to do this differently. I hear you, and my answer is still no. Those sentences do not shout, but they stand. And standing is what matters. Some people will not like you more when you communicate better. They will simply lose easier access to your confusion. People who benefited from your vagueness may resist your clarity. People who relied on your guilt may dislike your boundaries. People who were comfortable with your over-explaining may feel threatened by your simplicity. That does not mean you are wrong. It often means your communication is no longer organized around keeping everyone comfortable at your expense. A difficult conversation is not only a chance to express a thought, it is a chance to reveal your level of self-respect. Do you abandon yourself when the room gets tense? Do you betray the truth to stay liked? Do you become reactive when challenged? Do you lose your center when another person becomes emotional? Or can you remain aligned? That alignment is rare. And when a person develops it, their communication stops sounding like fear dressed up as politeness or force dressed up as confidence. It starts sounding like something much stronger. A person who knows how to stay with truth under pressure. Chapter 6. Why saying less often makes people sound more powerful than saying more. One of the clearest signs of weak communication is not always bad wording. Sometimes it is excess. Too many sentences, too much explanation, too much emotional leakage, too much repetition, too much urgency. People usually do this because they want to be understood. They think if they say it one more way, it will land better. If they explain it one more time, it will sound stronger. If they add one more paragraph, then finally the message will feel undeniable. But often the opposite happens. The point gets weaker. The energy disperses. The listener gets tired. The core truth gets buried under unnecessary weight. This is why restraint is one of the highest communication skills. Not silence as avoidance. Restraint as discipline. The discipline to stop when the truth has already arrived. A person who cannot stop talking is not always expressive. Sometimes they are simply being carried by fear. Fear of silence. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of seeming less intelligent than they hoped. Fear that their sentence was not enough on its own. So they keep speaking. Not because the message needs it, because the ego does. And ego-heavy speech is heavy to listen to. When someone speaks with restraint, something changes immediately. Their words feel selected. And selected words carry more weight than spilled words ever will. The strongest communicators are not constantly rescuing their own sentence. They are not repeating themselves because they do not trust the point. They are not flooding the room with verbal energy because silence scares them. They say what matters. Then they let it breathe. That breathing room is powerful because language needs space to land. Many people ruin their strongest line by refusing to stop after saying it. They land the point, then immediately weaken it with over-explaining. A person gives a clear answer. Then, because they feel exposed by the clarity, they soften it. Then they add more. Then they partly undo it. Then they explain why they said it. Then they apologize for how it may sound. Now the listener is no longer receiving one clean truth. They are receiving the speaker's anxiety about the truth. That anxiety becomes the loudest part. This is why saying less can make you sound stronger. Not because fewer words are always better, but because fewer words often reveal greater self-trust. A person who trusts their thought does not need to chase it after it leaves their mouth. They can let it stand. That is authority. Modern psychology helps here too. Over-explaining is often a regulation strategy. It is how anxious people try to manage uncertainty. They are not only speaking, they are trying to reduce the emotional risk of being misunderstood, disliked, doubted, or challenged. So they add more language to create more safety. But that often makes them sound less grounded. A grounded person does not usually need to pour out 5 layers of explanation for every point. They know what they mean. They know where they stand. They know what needs to be said. That internal certainty makes speech more efficient. This is one reason concise people often sound stronger, even when they are not more intelligent. Their restraint signals order, and order is persuasive. Restraint is not about becoming robotic. It is about becoming deliberate. You can be warm and restrained, clear and restrained, emotionally intelligent and restrained. Restraint does not remove humanity. It removes waste. The stronger communicator learns to cut. They cut the extra sentence, the extra defense, the extra apology, the extra repetition, the extra attempt to manage every possible interpretation. They stop trying to control the room with volume of language. They begin trusting force of meaning instead. So ask yourself, did this explanation help the message? Or was I trying to protect myself from how direct the truth sounded? Did I repeat this because it mattered? Or because I was afraid it was not enough? Am I saying this to communicate? Or to soothe my own discomfort in real time? Those questions refine a speaker quickly. And then there is silence. Silence is one of the most misunderstood tools in communication. Many people fear it because they think silence makes them look unsure, awkward, or unprepared. But often, silence does the opposite. Silence gives gravity to words. It creates emphasis. It lets the room catch up. It shows that you are not being dragged by nervous speed. A person who can tolerate silence without rushing to fill it often sounds more mature than a person who cannot stop talking. Why? Because silence shows control. A lot of weak communication comes from fear of the gap. The gap between question and answer. The gap after a difficult statement. The gap after disagreement. The gap where the other person is thinking. If you fear the gap, you will pollute it with unnecessary words. If you can tolerate the gap, your communication deepens. So, how do you build verbal restraint? Finish one sentence earlier than your habit wants to. Stop repeating unless repetition adds genuine force. Pause after an important sentence. Listen for your own verbal leakage. Get comfortable with not controlling every interpretation. A lot of over-talking comes from trying to eliminate every possible misunderstanding. But that is impossible. You can speak clearly. You can speak responsibly. You can speak with care. But you cannot fully manage every mind in the room. Once you accept that, speech becomes lighter, cleaner, more honest, less desperate. If this chapter is helping you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this message. Because for many people, the next level of communication does not begin when they learn to say more. It begins when they finally learn what to stop saying. Powerful communication is not the act of emptying your mind into the room. It is the art of delivering what matters in a form that can be received. That requires cutting, choosing, timing, silence, self-command. It requires respect for words, and words become more respected when they are not wasted. Chapter 7. How to become the kind of person whose presence, words, and even silence carry undeniable weight. At the deepest level, communication is not about technique. Technique matters. Structure matters. Tone matters. Timing matters. Listening matters. Emotional control matters. But beneath all of that, there is a more serious question. Who is the person speaking? Because sooner or later, every technique reaches its limit. And when it does, what remains is presence. Presence is what people feel before they can fully explain why they trust you or why they do not. It is what enters the room before your best sentence does. It is the emotional and psychological texture of your inner life made visible through your face, your pacing, your listening, your restraint, your timing, and your words. That is why some people can speak simply and still feel powerful. And some people can speak elegantly and still feel forgettable. The difference is not performance. It is embodiment. The strongest communicators are not merely using better language. They are becoming more ordered human beings. And that order changes everything. It changes how they enter a conversation, how quickly they react, how much they need approval, how much they need to prove, how much silence they can tolerate, how much pressure they can hold without collapsing into urgency. The Stoic is not trying to look composed. He is trying to become governed, not by every mood, not by every fear, not by every room, not by every opinion, governed from within. And that inner government changes speech in ways that are hard to fake for long. A person who has more self-command does not need to sound powerful every second. They do not strain for authority. They do not chase significance with constant verbal force. They do not try to dominate the room just to calm their own insecurity. They begin to trust that steadiness itself carries power. And it does. The deepest communication goal is not becoming more impressive. It is becoming more integrated, your thoughts clearer, your emotions steadier, your values stronger, your neediness quieter, your relationship with truth more honest. When those things start coming together, your communication changes naturally. Your tone settles, your timing improves, your sentences get cleaner, your listening gets deeper. Your words begin to carry the weight of someone who is no longer divided against themselves. That is rare, because many people are speaking while internally split. One part of them wants to tell the truth. Another wants to stay liked. One part wants to be direct. Another fears disapproval. One part wants to remain calm. Another is already reacting internally. One part wants to listen. Another is preparing a defense. That inner division always leaks, and people feel it. They may not consciously name it, but they feel something strained, something eager, something unstable. That is why powerful communication is not only about what the other person hears. It is about what they sense. And what they sense is often shaped by the person you are when nobody is watching. How you think when alone. How honestly you face yourself. How well you manage your impulses. How often you choose truth over performance. How much silence you can bear without escaping. How much discomfort you can survive without becoming false. These things build presence. Presence is earned. It is not a trick. When your mind, tone, body, and message are aligned, people feel that alignment as credibility. When they are not aligned, people feel friction. A person says they are calm, but their energy feels frantic. A person says they are confident, but their speech is overcompensating. A person says they are honest, but their words feel carefully engineered to avoid exposure. That friction weakens trust, but coherence strengthens it. So, if you want your words to carry weight, ask a deeper question than, how do I sound better? Ask, what kind of person is my speech revealing? Is it revealing someone ruled by urgency? Someone dependent on approval? Someone afraid of silence? Someone eager to prove? Someone who performs certainty because they do not yet feel grounded? Or is it revealing someone calmer, clearer, more deliberate, more truthful, more able to stay present under pressure? These are the real upgrades. Great communication is not the art of decorating your personality. It is the art of refining your character until your personality stops getting in the way of truth. That is what makes a person's silence feel strong. That is what makes a simple sentence land with unusual force. That is what makes people lean in when they speak. Not charisma alone. Substance. And substance takes time. It is built through repeated choices. The choice to think clearly before speaking. The choice to regulate emotion before reacting. The choice to listen without making everything about yourself. The choice to say less and mean it more. The choice to tell the truth without dressing it up in panic. The choice to let presence do some of the work words used to do badly. Over time, those choices form a person. A person whose communication is no longer merely functional. It becomes influential, not because they manipulate, because they are believable, not because they overwhelm, because they are grounded, not because they are always the loudest, because they are often the most internally settled. That kind of person carries weight even when they are not saying much. Their pauses mean something. Their no means something. Their honesty means something. Their calm means something. Their attention means something. Because everything is less diluted. The final stage of communication is not learning endless methods. It is becoming someone who no longer needs so many methods to sound real. A person whose words match their mind, whose mind is not at war with itself, whose tone does not betray their message, whose silence does not come from fear but from steadiness, whose speech is not a performance of worth but an expression of worth already built. That is a powerful communicator. And if this message has stayed with you to the end, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who is serious about changing the way they speak, listen, and carry themselves. Because better communication changes more than conversation. It changes trust, relationships, leadership, opportunities, and the entire way a person moves through the world. And if you leave with one final idea, let it be this: powerful communication does not come from trying harder to sound powerful. It comes from becoming a person whose thoughts are clearer, whose emotions are steadier, whose character is stronger, and whose presence no longer leaks confusion into the room. That is when speaking stops being performance and starts becoming power.